Hi, I'm Floyd Teeter, the Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for the South Jordan, Utah North Shore Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If this is your first time with us, welcome. You may want to check out some of the prior videos in this series in order for this one to make sense. If you're a returning visitor, hey, we're glad you're back. Today we're going to take a dip, specifically a dip into water in emergency preparedness. As you may recall from our last video, an issue with available drinking water is one of the disruptions we're most likely to face in a time of emergency. So it's an important consideration for your emergency preparedness plans. Water is life. As a general rule of thumb, you could survive 3 days without water. But 3 days of dehydration is not fun. Thirst, muscle cramps, fainting, permanent organ failure, then finally death. I don't know about you, but I don't want any 3 days of any of that. Effective emergency planning must include considerations for water. So just how much water are we talking about? For drinking water alone, both FEMA and the CDC recommend a minimum of 1 gallon per person per day. But I would personally recommend a bare minimum of 2 gallons, as people under stress need increased hydration. And by definition, an emergency puts people under stress. Increase that to 3 to 5 gallons per day if you're talking about cooking and very basic sanitation needs. But going back to that 1 gallon per day standard set up by FEMA and the CDC, both Be Ready Utah and FEMA and the CDC and just about anyone else you can find recommend a minimum of 14 gallons of water per person to cover an emergency using that 1 gallon per person per day yardstick. So even the minimum gallon per person per day represents a lot of water. How in the world do we store all that water? Well, in our stake, I'd break our membership into 2 basic categories: those with space to store significant amounts of water, and those with less space. How in the world are we going to do that? Well, let's talk about it. For those with more space, there are a lot of options for large-scale water storage. The 3 popular options in Daybreak that I've seen are a 300-gallon water tank, a 160-gallon water tank, or the tried and true 55-gallon water barrel. For those with less space, there are also some fine options available. The 100-gallon water bathtub reservoir or flexible water containers stored in the pantry are both pretty good options. And don't forget, if you have a water heater tank, you'll have 50 to 70 gallons of water available there. Now, some important tips for storing water, regardless of the amount of space you have. Number 1, treat your water before storing. 8 drops of household bleach per gallon will keep your water storage from becoming a biological grow farm. You don't want that. Don't store water barrels or tanks directly on cement. The toxins will leach through the barrel and ruin your stored water. And don't store them in direct sunlight to avoid contaminant growth. And also store your water low. At 8.34 pounds per gallon, water is very heavy. Imagine grabbing one of those barrels or even one of those flexible water containers and pulling it down from a high shelf, or even worse, having it fall down from a high shelf. You're talking about difficult, you're talking about dangerous, you're talking about please, please, please store it low. So what about your emergency pack in the event you have to leave your home and most of that stored water behind? Well, typically when we talk about emergency packs, we're talking about mobility. But as we've already noted, water is pretty heavy. Do the math. 72 hours of water for one person will weigh roughly 25 pounds. Now let's say you're carrying for 2 or 3 or 5 or more. That is a lot of weight to be rucking around on your back. So the solution is to carry a little and be ready to obtain and treat more. And for those of you here in Daybreak thinking, oh shoot, I'll just wander down to Ochre Lake and fill her up. Be cautious about that. Ochre Lake is beautiful, but the water is exceptionally nasty. It is chock full of parasites, vermin, and bugs that will wreak havoc in your digestive tract. And it's also prone to very toxic algae bloom. Drink that water only as a last resort, as a matter of life or death, and only after treating and boiling. And even then, no guarantees. So let's talk about some ideas for purifying water. Boiling water is very effective. At our altitude, keep the boil rolling for at least 3 minutes. 8 drops of household bleach will purify a gallon of water. Water treatment tablets work well and don't add much weight to your emergency pack. Or you can add a water filtration system. I've shown the Berkeley, the Katadyn, and the Life Straw here, but there are plenty of additional options that will work if you're forced to grab the emergency pack and head for safe ground. So that pretty well wraps up our dip into water for emergency preparedness. I've included links to all the water storage and filtration options I've mentioned below. So until next time, be safe, be smart, and be ready.